Did you know that Emperor Nero did not play the lyre while Rome burned? Everything you think you know about this emperor might be a myth. Throughout history, his name has been etched as synonymous with cruelty, extravagance, and madness, but, was he really as evil as we've been led to believe? Over the centuries, Nero has been one of the most controversial figures in Rome, but the truth behind his character is much more complex than we've been told. Today, we are going to discover together the true story of this emperor. Was he really the monster they painted, or simply a product of his time? Stay until the end, where we will reveal how myths about Nero intertwine with historical facts, and the impact his legacy had on Rome and the world that followed. To understand Nero, we need to look beyond his figure and examine the Rome in which he lived. Imagine an imperial city stretching along rivers, where grandeur and poverty coexist. Rome, in the 1st century AD, was an empire on the rise, but not everything was in harmony. Rome was divided. On one side, the aristocracy and patricians, enjoying unimaginable luxuries. On the other, the plebeians and slaves, struggling to survive in a city that offered them only misery and oppression. Nero, upon coming to power, inherited a tense and complex situation. Social inequality and a financial crisis were hitting the Roman people, and his leadership had to address those issues. In the early years of his reign, Nero tried to win over the people. He organized public games to entertain the masses and distributed food. It was a kind of bread and circuses to keep the people calm, but the cost of these initiatives was enormous, and the empire was far from self-sufficient. Meanwhile, the Roman elite began to criticize his style of governance, his lack of political experience and his growing disinterest in state affairs. What did Nero do when the pressures increased? He began to surround himself with key figures who could help him stay in power, but his increasing authoritarianism and the corruption within his administration caused tensions to rise. Rome, under his rule, was not only a city of splendor. It was also a city in crisis, where politics, conspiracies, and chaos began to gain ground. One of the most persistent myths about Nero is that he played the lyre while Rome burned. Imagine the scene, the city burning, flames devouring its streets, and an emperor enjoying the spectacle while playing his instrument. This story has been the basis for most of the popular depictions of Nero as the epitome of evil. But is it really true? The reality is much more complex. The fire in Rome, which started in 64 AD, was a devastating tragedy. The flames destroyed much of the city, but there is something crucial we must understand: Nero was not in Rome when the fire began. In fact, he was at his villa in Antium, and when he heard of the disaster, he returned to the city to oversee the rescue efforts. So, where did this myth come from? The idea that Nero played the lyre while the city burned originated from accusations against him after the disaster. Some ancient historians, like Tacitus, mentioned that Nero was accused of having started the fire. However, there is no solid evidence to support this accusation. It's most likely that the myth was amplified by his political opponents to discredit him, using the symbolism of the fire to highlight his supposed indifference to the suffering of his people. Moreover, after the fire, Nero decided to use the crisis to carry out a massive rebuilding project, which included creating a new Rome with better safety standards. Instead of being the villain history painted him as, he might have been more focused on restoring the city than on personal enjoyment. So why does this myth persist? The answer lies in political manipulation and how historical accounts can be distorted to serve certain interests. Nero's figure was used as a scapegoat for a national tragedy that could not be controlled. Although the image of Nero as a tyrannical emperor has persisted throughout history, there is another aspect of his reign that is often overlooked: his love for the arts and his attempt to be recognized as a great artist. Unlike other Roman emperors, Nero not only ruled Rome but also aspired to be the center of the artistic world of his time. In his youth, he was known for his enthusiasm for music, poetry, and theater. In fact, he devoted himself to playing the lyre, reciting poetry, and organizing theatrical competitions where he himself was the lead actor. In the Neronic Games, organized by him, Nero was not only the sponsor but also the protagonist of the artistic performances. For some, This was a sign of a cultured emperor who understood the importance of the arts for the grandeur of the empire. However, for others, his obsession with self-promotion through the arts was seen as a whim of a monarch who preferred to be applauded as an artist rather than rule wisely. But what truly generated rejection was the way Nero used the arts to consolidate his power. His performances were more than just spectacles, they were a way to win the favor of the people and distract from the political and economic difficulties of the empire. Tacitus and Suetonius openly criticize him, describing him as an emperor who not only wanted to rule Rome, but also be worshipped as an artist. What is ironic is that, while Nero focused on his artistic career, Rome faced serious governance problems. His interest in spectacle and art was, in many ways, a form of escape from the growing political tension, popular discontent, and the economic failures of his administration. In his attempt to transcend as an artist, Nero forgot that the true power of an emperor lies in his ability to govern and maintain order. However, his passion for the arts remains a legacy that defines him, at least in popular culture. One of the most fascinating aspects of Nero's reign is his relationship with the Senate and the Roman elites. At first, Nero was supported by these powerful figures. The young emperor, under the tutelage of his advisor Seneca and the prefect of the Praetorian Guard Burrus, was seen as a promise to restore order in an empire that was beginning to show signs of decline. However, this initial support did not last long. As Nero began to take control, he started to become increasingly authoritarian, distancing himself from republican practices and the Senate, which began to create tensions with the Roman elite. Nero was unwilling to share power, and instead of ruling in collaboration with Roman institutions, he began to disregard them. Tensions reached a boiling point with the Pisonian conspiracy in 65 AD, an assassination attempt organized by senators and other Roman nobles unhappy with his rule. This plot highlighted the growing discontent with his leadership style. When Nero learned of the conspiracy, he reacted drastically, unleashing a political purge that resulted in the execution of many of his opponents. What had once been a cooperative relationship with the Senate turned into a power struggle and a breach of mutual trust. Increasingly paranoid, Nero began to see traitors everywhere. He started eliminating key figures, such as his mother Agrippina, whom he had ordered to be murdered to consolidate his power even further. The Roman nobility and senators were seen by Nero as rivals and threats to his reign, leading to an escalation of political repression. As time went on, Nero's relationship with the Senate deteriorated, and what had begun as a reign of promises and expectations ended up being a government marked by disdain for republican tradition. His administration became more focused on his personal power than on the welfare of the state. But was this downfall inevitable? Did Nero's leadership style simply reflect the inherent tensions of absolute power, or was it a series of poor decisions that led to his fall? As Nero consolidated his power, his behavior became increasingly authoritarian and ruthless. Although his reign was initially marked by optimism, it soon became evident that his government would be marked not only by his artistic extravagances but also by his ferocity and cruelty. The first major scandal of his reign was the murder of his mother Agrippina in 59 AD. After a failed attempt to poison her, Nero ordered her to be killed at her own residence. This action, motivated by the need to secure his power, marked the beginning of a series of eliminations of those he considered a threat to his throne. Agrippina's death left a deep stain on his legacy, and the Roman people could not help but wonder how far he was willing to go to maintain his rule. But the most infamous act of his reign was the persecution of Christians following the Great Fire of Rome. In an attempt to divert attention from his own failure, Nero used the Christians as scapegoats, accusing them of causing the disaster. Many Christians were thrown to the beasts in the Colosseum, crucified, or burned alive. This was the beginning of the first major persecutions against Christ's followers. While Rome suffered, Nero focused on his greatest project, the Domus Aurea, the Golden Palace. The opulent palace, with its unparalleled grandeur, was a symbol of the emperor's decadence. This vast complex of palaces, gardens, and ponds was built in the heart of Rome, right after the fire. Some historians claim that, in his pursuit of architectural immortality, Nero stripped the Romans of their properties, something that contributed to the disdain many felt for him. Nero's extravagance knew no bounds. It was even said that, at his parties, he dressed as a wild animal, adopting the appearance of a beast, and participated in orgies and perverse games. The criticism was fierce. Nero was not only an emperor, but a man without morals, representing everything that was wrong with absolute power. As time went on, Nero began to isolate himself more and more. Paranoia grew, and his distrust of everyone around him led him to make even more extreme decisions. Was Nero simply a product of his time, or was it absolute power that completely corrupted him? Like every empire, Nero's reign had a beginning and an end. While his early years were marked by promises of greatness and renewal, his reign ended in chaos and despair, both for him and the empire he ruled. Throughout his rule, Nero faced multiple challenges. As his tyranny grew, so did the opposition. In 65 AD, the Pisonian conspiracy broke out, an assassination attempt on Nero orchestrated by senators and high-ranking officials dissatisfied with his leadership. Although the conspiracy was uncovered, the threat to the emperor remained latent. Despite the defeat of the conspirators, Nero could not shake the feeling that betrayal was all around him. His distrust took over, and he began purging those around him, both in the Senate and his inner circle. Paranoia led him to extreme isolation. But revolts did not only come from within the city. The provinces of the empire began to rebel due to growing discontent with his leadership. In 68 AD, the revolt in Hispania and the guerrillas in Gaul indicated that Rome's control over its territories was in danger. Faced with these problems, Nero realized his reign was nearing its end. Finally, the Senate, tired of his rule, declared him an enemy of the state, and in a tragic turn, Nero was abandoned by his own supporters. With the empire on the verge of dissolution, Nero, isolated and unsupported, made his final decision. He committed suicide in June of 68 AD, at just 30 years old. Nero's death marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, which had ruled Rome for over a century. After his fall, Rome entered a period of instability known as the Year of the Four Emperors, where power was violently contested among several claimants to the throne. Nero's once glorified figure was replaced by that of a failed emperor, whose death left a disordered and vulnerable Rome. With his suicide, Nero left a legacy of chaos, violence, and paranoia. But he also left behind a complex story that continues to be debated among historians. Was Nero simply a tyrant, or was he a victim of political pressures and absolute power that led him to his ruin? In the end, Nero is one of the most complex and contradictory emperors in Roman history. On one hand, his decisions and acts of tyranny have marked him as the epitome of corruption and abuse of power. But on the other hand, is it fair to reduce his entire figure to a series of myths and distortions? Nero was not a mere monster, he was an emperor who lived in a Rome in crisis, marked by political, social, and economic tensions. He was a man who inherited an empire where absolute power had the risk of corrupting anyone who wielded it. Throughout his reign, Nero faced enormous challenges, both internal and external, and while many of his acts were condemnable, we must not forget that some of his efforts, like the rebuilding of Rome after the fire, reflect a complexity in his character. The story of Nero, though filled with excesses and tragedies, is also a warning about the dangers of absolute power and corruption. It reminds us of how propaganda and distorted accounts can give legendary form to a character, for better or for worse. So, was Nero an emperor unjustly vilified, or was he simply a man who could not handle the pressures of excessive power? It's a question that each person must answer according to their own view of history. But what is certain is that his legacy, like that of many other great historical figures, remains a topic of debate and reflection. What do you think of Nero? Do you think his story has been distorted, or was he truly the tyrant that most accounts portray? Leave us your opinion in the comments. If this analysis surprised you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more content about history, and share this video with your friends so that we can all continue debating this fascinating topic. See you in the next video.